you building those relationships with your young students, first or third grade?
Yeah, I think for me, it really, I guess, the way I always grounded myself and like how am I going to build a relationship with these students is like, well, first I have to consider them as like human beings. They're not just my students. They're not just, and I think in education today, especially, they're not just my little test score producers, which is like a huge pressure. But really just I'm like, who are you as a human being? Who are you as a whole person? And like, not just, so I would just ask questions. Like I would just ask them. I would do my best to make sure I was like equitably trying to get to know everyone too, like making sure I wasn't just focusing on certain kids, because there are kids that will come into your classroom seeking that connection, seeking that relationship already. And those are the ones that it's like, all right, let's go, let's do this, let's build this relationship. And they will talk to you every day about what's going on, unprompted, especially first graders, like just will tell you everything that's going on. But especially the students that might have, and I saw this more in third grade because they had, it's crazy. You can totally see that socialization that happens just in those few years of school from like first to third grade. There are some kids that are already don't have a positive relationship with school. I even had first graders who had said things to me like, school is not for me, and like school's not my thing. And I think intentionally just checking in with them, really similar to the way we do in Amplify RJ community spaces, just asking like, how are you? What's going on with you? And making sure it was very authentic, because students can tell when you're not being authentic. Kids can tell when you might have like an ulterior motive. So to genuinely just be like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on with you? What did you do this weekend? Like, what do you like to do when you go home? And just like taking the time to get to know them, which can be really hard because the white supremacy culture of urgency is a huge one you see in schools, where it feels like the test scores, the teaching, the standards is also urgent, and it's also important that relationships get put on the back burner. So being consciously like, no, I'm going to set aside time today for us to build relationships. And then also doing that among students. Like I would really try to intentionally set aside time and space to build community within the classroom, not just between me and individual students, but like between the whole class. How can we start to see each other as a community of learners, that we're here to learn from each other, we're here to learn with each other. And I love to do that through games. That's my favorite way to do that, is playing games, like icebreaker games, variations of like step into the circle games. Like, that's my favorite way to build community with students.
Yeah. So just to summarize that, thinking about,
sorry.
I mean, tie it up in a bow for people. One, like, see them as humans, right? Show up authentically in those relationships. Don't fake that you want to build relationships if you don't want to build relationships, right? Create the time, and don't make it just about relationships between you and students. Build that within your classroom. Sometimes playing games, sometimes doing other things, group work. Why growing up did like we all dread group work, right? Like how can we like build that capacity for people to be excited about that?
Okay, so this is just a plug for a random book I have been listening to that is like a young adult book called Elatsoe, and it's written by a Native American woman, and it's just super awesome. But they had this scene where there's these two kids talking about like, why is group work always so horrible? And like, yeah, you ever notice that like there's one person that does all the work, or there's one person, and then there's always a few people that don't do anything. And they were just like kind of deconstructing group work and how it often plays out. And they were like, yeah, teachers always say like they assign us group work because it's going to get us ready for the real world, like as if we're not already in the real world. And then they kind of go on to say like, well, maybe this is how the real world is that there are people that will take on the work and others that won't do anything. And I think it was interesting commentary on how if you don't set up equitable practices in your room to understand, and that relationship of community to understand that, like, hey, this group work is, you need, like, the intention of the group work is that you're working together and that you're all striving towards the same goal, that collectivist mindset. If you're not kind of setting that up through your practices every day as the educator, modeling that and showing students that on a larger scale, it probably won't play out like that when you have them do the group work. Like, they'll probably return to some of those values that they've been socialized to do, which is to think individualistically. And yeah, so I think group work doesn't play out well if you don't set those foundations.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely link that book in the description. Send that to me so we can do that. And like, yeah, it's so important that like that foundation is modeled for students.